Morning, everyone. It is 8:30. We will get started in just a minute. We do have a fairly steady flow of people still coming in, and we will look forward to getting started and keeping you on time. So we'll give it just another minute. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Chris Clark, CEO of the Queen Creek Chamber of Commerce. So happy to have you all here this morning. I do serve as the chair of the EDCCA Legislative Committee this year, and looking forward to a great session. We do have a lot of things that have been placed on the ballot this year, and really important that we get those right. As you know, in most cases, and we'll have Dorn Policy Group here explain it in just a minute, but in most cases, once those are passed, they're voter protected, so there's no going back. And I think it's something that most people don't understand. So hopefully after you've participated here, you'll be able to go out and talk to people about that and make sure they understand there's no changing your mind. 10, 20, 30 years down the road, we're permanent. So with that, we'd like to introduce Tom Dorn of the Dorn Policy Group. He and Eric will be leading us through this today. And take it away, Tom.
Thank you, Chris. Button wasn't working. Thank you, Chris, and good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for this Ballot Issues Forum. It's fantastic that the East Valley Chambers of Commerce Alliance has decided to do this. And as Chris just indicated, it's so important that everybody be informed on all of these ballot measures. So hopefully our exercise this morning will help you understand better what's going to be on your ballot. And as Chris indicated, tell a friend, make sure they understand the importance of these ballot measures. First off, well, Eric Emmert, my colleague and friend, we're going to go through these with you. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the structure, and then he's going to dive in and take the lead on the discussion with regard to each specific ballot measure. With regard to the East Valley Chambers of Commerce Alliance, those of you that are not aware of the organization or may not know the history of it, it was established back in 1999 by the Chambers of the East Valley as a united voice on public policy matters down at the state capitol. And since then, we've been actually the largest chamber organization member-wise for down at the state capitol. And it's been replicated finally after a few attempts. It's now replicated by the West Valley, and we're very happy about that. We gave them our report card, our agenda. It's like, this is how you do it, because it's not about regions. It's about making sure that the Arizona business community is a great place to conduct business and for all of us to live. And one other thing I want to point out, this has been a model for around the country too. Since it's been successful for 23 years, other regions have heard about this and around the country have replicated it. Currently, our membership is listed right there, all of the 7 chambers in the East Valley. So we're very proud of the organization and doing some good work in the public policy front. Before Eric and I get started, we wanted to make sure that everyone understands the vocabulary. And some people are always surprised because they didn't know the difference. Ballot measures can arrive in two ways. They're either initiated by the people or they're referred by the legislature. So that's why you'll hear initiatives and referrals used interchangeably. And yes, they are the same thing in that they end up on the ballot. However, how they get there is different. The initiative is when the people take out paperwork at the Secretary of State's office, and then they start hanging out at Costco and Walmart and grocery stores and your kid's soccer game and start collecting signatures. And that's how it gets on the ballot once it's codified, once it's reviewed by the Secretary of State, and the signatures are valid, the addresses are valid, the person that circulated the petitions, they signed the back. And often you'll hear all those things are under litigation because people that do not want that initiative to make it to the ballot often try through legal means to see they did not do it right, they did not do it right, and they try to get it kicked off the ballot. So we've seen that, and Eric will talk a little bit about that, but historically that's something that we've had. So that's the initiative process, and often it's very expensive because and that's where you get the idea that it's from out-of-state groups that maybe fund some of these initiatives. Ballot referrals, now these are our elected officials down at the state legislature. They run a bill basically, but it's called a concurrent resolution. And it's either Senate SCR or an HCR, House concurrent resolution, or a Senate concurrent resolution. And that does not go to the governor. So sometimes the legislature has gotten around the governor who doesn't want to put something on the ballot, and they pass it out of both chambers, and it goes to the Secretary of State's office, and he or she then puts it onto the ballot at the next general election ballot. As obviously these are referred to the people, and it goes in two ways. They can have a statutory referral where they're trying to get something passed they want to change the statutes, but it now becomes voter protected, or they want to change something in the Constitution, and obviously that's voter protected. The Constitution is always, constitutional changes cannot happen by the legislature. They must be referred to the voters. And so that's the difference between an initiative and a referral. So hopefully that's helpful. Please explain that to your family tonight at dinner. Next, and knowing that, so we have 10 measures on the ballot, and there were more, I believe there was over 20 initiatives that were taken out, but many of them never made it. They didn't get the signatures. But we have 10 measures on the ballot, and 8 of them are referrals from the legislature, and 2 are initiatives from the street. So I would say the citizens, but the citizens ultimately do sign it, but sometimes they're from outside interest groups that hire people to collect signatures, and they get on the ballot. And before Eric starts to go through the ballot measures, it's very important for you to understand why it's called Voter Protection Act. And that's why we have so-called, in air quotes, Voter Protection Act. Back in the 1990s, when Governor Symington was governor and the legislature, it was a Republican-controlled legislature at the time. In 1996 is when the Medical Marijuana Act was passed. And it was different times back then. And so, marijuana wasn't it's probably prevalent, but it wasn't politically accepted or socially accepted the way it is by many today. And the people passed the Voter Protection Act. And the legislature, the conservative legislature, goes, what? The people didn't know what they were passing. That makes no sense. We can't have medical marijuana in the state of Arizona. So those that were behind the Medical Marijuana Act decided, you know what, we're going to go to the ballot and we're going to overturn what the legislature just did. And we're going to make it harder for them to overturn what the people decided to vote on in an election. And you know what? We're going to go take it even further. If they do change it, if the legislature does try to change it, they're going to have to do it with 3/4 of a vote of the legislature. And we'll go even further. They're going to have to change, they're going to have to further the intent of the original underlying ballot measure that passed. The Voter Protection Act 2 years later passed. And so that's where we call and it was Proposition 105 at the time. So that's why when you hear people say, oh, Proposition 105, the Voter Protection Act, that comes from the 1998 election from the medical marijuana people that were not happy that the legislature overturned their voter passed initiative in 1996. So with that as the backdrop and your clear understanding of that, let's go into the ballot measures, knowing, as Chris indicated at the front end of this, it's very hard to change propositions, ballot measures once they're passed. And for those reasons that I already explained, to further the intent, and it must take 3/4 of the legislature. So it is very, very important that we know what we're voting on. And with that, I'll turn it over to Eric Emmert, who is very good public policy. It's been an honor to work with him for so many years, and he will lead all of us through this discussion on each ballot measure. Eric?
Thank you, Tom. Good morning, everyone. We have 10 ballot measures, as Tom noted, to cover. We're going to try and offer both perspectives from opponents and proponents as we go through these, if there are controversial measures that we discuss. But hopefully you walk away with a better understanding of what's on your ballot, what issues are before you, and weigh that against the Voter Protection Act and the fact that it is very difficult to change something that is passed at the ballot for the ebbs and flows of dynamic economy or changes in technology. The legislature just has a very challenging time getting 3/4 of a vote to do almost anything when it's been passed by the people. So it's only happened a couple times in the history of Arizona. Just remember that as we go forward. So let's dive in. Proposition 128. This addresses an issue that has plagued Arizona for a few years now, in that any sort of law that is determined to be unconstitutional or illegal by either the Arizona Supreme Court or the US Supreme Court is basically dead law. It sits on the books. It doesn't have any meaning. An example is an issue that your chamber worked on this year, dealing with theft by extortion. There was a section of statute that allowed or would have allowed you to go after somebody who leaves a bad post on a social media website about your business. The section of statute was dead law because the Arizona Supreme Court ruled it unconstitutional. Now, it wasn't necessarily voter protected, but we were able to run a bill with a simple majority of each chamber of the legislature and the governor's signature that allows you to go after someone that threatens your business with a social media post in exchange for something for free. That, by definition, is theft by extortion. But again, that section of statute was dead law. This would allow a voter protected section of statute to be addressed by the legislature with just a simple majority. You wouldn't need to have a supermajority, like Tom talked about in the previous slide, of 3/4 to change what's essentially a dead law. So it makes sense to the proponents. However, the opponents say that it circumvents the will of the voters. The voters wanted to pass a law at the ballot. They did. It was ruled unconstitutional. And the legislature should still have 3/4 of a vote in each chamber to change even a dead law. Proponents say that it's any flawed initiative or flawed ballot measure that is passed is allowed to be rectified by the legislature. It's a simple change. That's what this proposition does. Proposition 129. This comes from us as a referral from the legislature in response to a Supreme Court ruling that states that initiatives don't have to address a single subject. Let me give you an example. Back in 2016, voters in Arizona voted in Proposition 206. That was the minimum wage law that we're all now that we have on the books currently. It also included a paid sick leave provision, arguably two different things. Had the single subject rule been in place, that particular ballot measure could have been thrown off. It would have been litigated. What this does is matches things up to what the rules are at the legislature. Any bill that goes through the legislature has to address one single subject. Congress obviously doesn't adhere to this principle, but Arizona does. So it basically makes the rules the same, whether it's a bill at the legislature or whether it's an initiative at the ballot, it has to address just one single subject. Proposition 130. This is arguably a cleanup bill or a cleanup ballot measure. There are 13 different exemptions that exist in the Constitution for property taxes. Examples are widows, widowers, persons with disabilities, veterans with disabilities. Each of these groups can be exempted from paying property taxes because of fixed income reasons. What this does is it consolidates those into one and then allows the legislature to set the exemptions or the qualifications rather than having them solidified in the Constitution. There aren't many groups that are opposed to this. In fact, we're not aware of any organized groups that are opposed to this. However, there aren't a whole lot of groups other than veteran groups that are supporting this. It's just really more of a cleanup bill or provision than anything. Proposition 131. Arizona is currently only one of 5 states out of our 50 that do not have a lieutenant governor. So 2 of our East Valley legislators, one Republican, one Democrat, proposed a proposition that would allow for a lieutenant governor, much like a vice president, to be placed on a joint ticket with the governor, like a vice president and a president. Reason being, the argument for at least, is that you have continuity in party if the governor leaves to go someplace else. For example, back in the 2000s, Janet Napolitano was our governor. She left after Barack Obama was elected president to go be Secretary of Homeland Security. We then had Jan Brewer come in behind her, and that was 2 different parties. The argument being that if the voters elect a Democrat should succeed them. Or if the voters elect a Republican, that a Republican should succeed them too. This would also require the lieutenant governor to function essentially as a chief of staff to the governor, but that's the reason for this particular proposition that you'll have on your ballot. Proposition 132. At the legislature, if any lawmaker introduces a bill that includes a new tax, it has to pass by 2/3 majority of each chamber of the legislature. The argument being, if you're going to tax the people, there should be a higher threshold to do that. The initiative process doesn't require that. This tries to balance that out to a degree and requires any initiative initiated by the people to be passed by a 60% majority if it includes a new tax. There have been questions about whether this applies to local initiatives or, better yet, bond provisions. It does not. This is a state issue, so any state ballot measure that introduces a new tax must pass at 60% if this passes in November. Proposition 308. This particular referral from the legislature allows any high school student that has been through 2 years of high school in Arizona and graduated, or some sort of equivalent, high school graduation equivalent, and goes to a state university or community college to receive in-state tuition, not free tuition, not out-of-state tuition, but in-state tuition, regardless of their immigration status. The business community is kind of looking at this as an economic development pipeline issue. Others would say that no, they are here illegally and they shouldn't receive in-state tuition. This is aimed at the DACA children or the dreamers, however you want to label them. It is kids who were perhaps born in another country. They have come across the border because of their parents, not necessarily by their own actions, and they're here as part of a family. They go through 2 years of high school, they graduate, and they then receive in-state tuition with this particular proposition. Proposition 309. You know, in general, Arizona has a pretty good election system. I think that's been proven through several audits, even one at the state legislature. However, there are problems still that we can close some loopholes and make the system appropriately tighter and specific to legal residents. So this tries to address several loopholes in our voting system. What it does is it requires a voter who comes to a polling location to produce an ID and then sign an affidavit that they are who they say they are. Reason being, in Arizona, we don't ballot harvest. We don't go around collecting a bunch of ballots and then dump them into the ballot box on election day. However, you can have caregivers or immediate relatives collect ballots and take them on election day to polling places and submit those. However, the problem exists that you don't have to show an ID. You don't have to explain that the ballots that you're carrying are immediate relatives or that you're a caregiver for someone. This affidavit process would take care of that and require you to show an ID when you drop off ballots. It's not trying to prevent people from voting. It's simply trying to get people to adhere to current law, but through closing some loopholes. Proposition 310. Arizona has quite a few fire districts. Many of them, most of them, are rural in nature. So if you drive to rural sections of the state, you are covered under fire districts, typically. Those fire districts are some of them are facing budget challenges. Some of them don't have property value base that other places do, metropolitan areas, and they're facing budget challenges. So what this does is it increases the state sales tax rate, also known as the TPT or transaction privilege tax rate, by 1/10 of a cent from 5.6 to 5.7. That money then goes into a fund that gets distributed to all the fire districts, regardless of whether you've been a good steward of tax dollars or not, and funds those districts. The argument for this is that even urban residents need fire protection in rural areas, and this will help some of our more challenged districts become solvent. The argument against this: one, it's a new tax. Two, that there are some fire districts that are arguably mismanaged if you look at their balance sheet, and that this is just feeding that mismanagement. Three, that the money that is collected and distributed based on property valuations goes to both those districts who have been responsible with tax dollars and those who have not been responsible with tax dollars. We've been asked what essentially happens if this does not pass. What you're likely to see is consolidation of fire districts to create a bigger property tax base for those districts and address things that way. Proposition 209. Tom noted that Arizona, because of its Voter Protection Act, is often a petri dish for out-of-state groups testing some public policy that they want to put on the ballot. It does cost a lot of money, but this is an example of one of those. This comes from an out-of-state union in California. And what it tries to address is predatory debt collection. Sounds great. However, what it does essentially is makes formula adjustments for individuals who are low income and how their assets are calculated. It's designed to prevent them from debt collection. The net effect of this is that that low income individuals who acquire debt, they can't have their wages garnished. People can't go after them by placing liens on their property. Sounds altruistic, especially when dealing with medical bills, which there's a provision that caps that as well. However, think of that in your own business. Someone comes in, they incur some debt with your business, and you can't go after them. While this is targeted at debt collection for healthcare, it impacts everybody and it creates a slippery slope. So take a look at the provisions of this bill as you consider it at the ballot. Last one, Proposition 211. This is aimed at, I believe this is from out of state too, but this is aimed at trying to shine a light on dark money. Again, sounds altruistic, but what the bill does is it sets caps for independent expenditures. Those are the groups running commercials that say, call Senator Sinema and thank her for voting for X, or thank Senator Kelly because he supports Y. Those types of commercials come from groups that are trying to educate the public as to how a particular lawmaker or candidate voted in the past or what they support. It's designed to be educational in nature. You don't have to disclose who is funding your independent expenditure under current law. This, however, would set caps to require that. The proponents say, again, it shines a light on dark money and tries to eliminate that. The opponents look at what is occurring, especially in social media, whereby the cancel culture will go after a business just for donating to an independent expenditure or a specific cause or speaking their mind on a particular issue. So there are good things and bad things about this. If you talk with proponents and opponents, take a look at the provisions yourself and make your own decision. With that, Tom, I'll kick it back to you and let you talk about election dates.
Okay, great job, Eric. And just so you know, we will be taking questions if anyone has them. And I think Chris indicated that through the chat, and then he'll ask us the questions from those of you that have them. We did want to point out for everyone's information that here are the dates that are very important. If you are not aware of this, you will be receiving, if you are registered for an early ballot, you'll receive that by October 12th. And that is the time in which early voting starts. And well, you can read the dates yourself right there. Election day is Tuesday, November 8th. And one thing I just want to add, Arizona is very thorough. Some people question, why can't we have all the votes done on election day? It's because we have such a high percentage, over 80%, that like to mail early voting. They either mail it ahead of time or they drop it off and that there's been a big movement lately to drop ballots off on election day. So they don't mail it in, but they bring them into the polling place on election day, but they are an early ballot. So the whole process of having to check the signatures and verify the signatures with very tight security and bipartisan observation, that all takes a while. So that's why we do not have, the announcements at the end of the night, like we seem to have in the old days, but now it does drag on for several days, and that's because the whole emphasis on people are doing early voting, but they're not delivering it until election day. So those are the important dates, and we do highly encourage you to spread the word on this information, and in everything that you've learned today. Hopefully we even all of you educated people, which is everybody on the list, hopefully you've learned something, and we were able to help you clarify some of the matters that are out there with the ballot measures that are initiatives and referrals that we all as citizens have an opportunity to vote on. And if you didn't want to ask any questions in this group, feel free to send Eric and I emails at our addresses. We're happy to help everybody and answer any quick questions. Of course, they're not official. None of these are official opinions or positions of the East Valley Chambers of Commerce Alliance or any of the chambers. So if we reply to you, it's not on their behalf. Just so you know, the Alliance does not take positions on these. At this point, they may, but as of right now, we have no positions. Some of the individual chambers are taking positions, but you'll know that through the chamber that you're involved. So with that, Eric, unless you have anything to add, we'll turn it over to Chris and lead us through questions and to the end.
No, thank you, Tom.
Okay. Thanks, Chris.
Well, thank you both. That's quite a lineup that we have. We will have to make sure we get in on those. And if you have questions, you can raise your hand or put them in the chat, and we will get to those. So we'll give you just a minute. Here comes the first one. Prop 211. I understand the 50,000 and the 25, but I'm confused by the $5,000 mentioned.
Eric.
Nope, sorry, forgot to hit mute or unmute. Apologize. Well, that was lifted from the analysis that was done by Legislative Council. What they do is every time that an initiative comes forward, they write up the legal impact of the initiative. So what they've said is that the identity of each donor of original monies who has contributed directly or indirectly more than $5,000 of money in in-kind contributions for campaign media spending during any election cycle to the covered person has to be donated. Now, up to $25,000 for media campaign, an additional $15,000 during an election cycle for any other type of campaign. So you can have campaign contributions, and you can have the independent expenditure contributions. What this is addressing is the independent expenditure contributions.
And if I may add, some people have said, you know, people will, instead of giving 5,000, I'll give 4,900. So you can try to, people will game the system either way, and they'll split, have other people make donations. So you hear that out there. Yes, everyone understands the desire to have disclosure of who's donating to groups that are trying to impact elections. But then again, people may just go below the limits or split out their money. So it's one of those things you're going to have a hard time, if it does pass, trying to really identify people.
Anybody else? Recording will be sent out to the individual chambers so they can post or distribute according to their policies. So we will have a chance to review those. And I'm sure each of the chambers will be posting the snippets of information for everybody as well. All right, not seeing any further questions. I'd like to thank the Dorn Policy Group for being here today. Thank you, Tom and Eric, for your leadership and always keeping us well informed. I'd like to thank the other chambers as well. Thank you for all that you do for us to work together. And thank you all for attending, and we look forward to a great week next week, and we'll see what we can do with the ballots. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.